Greetings to everyone watching. For the Mental Health Awareness Campaign of 500 Women Scientists, we are here talking about the mental health crisis in STEM. We're asking the important questions and having the difficult conversations. Today, I have the great pleasure of talking to Rosie Dutt, who is a neuroscientist and a doctoral researcher. Her research interests focus on neuroimaging analysis techniques in the context of mental health conditions and psychiatric disorders. Hi, Rosie. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your research and background?
Yes, for sure. So I'm a PhD student in the imaging science program. Here, my research focuses on applying machine learning techniques to brain scans to predict depression. Actually, the field of psychiatry as a whole is the only field where we don't use biological changes to diagnose the patient and then treat them. So I'm particularly passionate about this, and I have kind of a very long history as to how I even got to this point. But in conjunction with sort of the machine learning applications and brain scans, I also look at various life events. So things such as getting a promotion or publishing a paper, or indeed other personal life events such as health issues, or indeed having financial struggles, and how they also, in conjunction with brain changes, impact depression. So I'm particularly interested in the holistic understanding of the individual, from changes in their life to changes in their brain. And I'm hoping to obviously contribute to the field and indeed support research in this regard.
That's wonderful. Thank you for the insights into your research. Let's dive into the questions of today. There is an indubitable mental health crisis in science, which requires immediate action. Women scientists, minorities, and doctoral researchers are especially susceptible to these crises. What are your perspectives on this?
So I think that just generally the PhD is a pretty isolating experience. And I don't think there's many frameworks in place, especially being a woman in the engineering department. I am one of two individuals that identify as women in my program. There was another woman who dropped the program, and then there's another individual that is trans. So we are just outnumbered just generally in the field, both in engineering and in neuroscience. The numbers are a little bit better. But then in terms of minority, I am indeed the only woman of color in my program. So that in itself is pretty isolating. On top of that, I'm studying in America and I'm not in my home country of England. So there are also differences that I experience. So it's several layers on top of being a woman, then being a minority, then also being a woman who's not from this particular country. Just to highlight one example, initially when I first moved here, being in the engineering department, I wasn't aware of the way in which individuals are defined in this country. There's only 5 checkboxes. I think it's Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, and I think those are the ones that I remember. And I didn't fit into any of those categories personally, but I was told, well, you could put down Asian because our demographic in engineering is actually Asian. So it's just small things like this which actually make you realize you're different. So that in itself is sort of ingrained more structurally in the system. But it's isolating, so there's that aspect to it. But then there's also sort of personal aspects that we can get into in other questions, I'm sure. But I just think that there should be more support for women scientists and then minorities within the field.
Thank you for your perspective. I think I couldn't agree more. What have been some of the personal and proximal struggles that you have experienced or witnessed in terms of mental health?
Yeah, so I can start personally. I was always interested in mental health. I was always interested in the sort of, I guess, harder mental health conditions such as schizophrenia, bipolar, And then, so around the age of 16, I've always been sort of within this field, and I actually was in an undergraduate institute where it was a medical school, so a lot of focus on psychiatric conditions, given that I picked that specific track. And then I realized if I went into the field of psychiatry, I'd actually just be giving out drugs if I was a psychiatrist, so I'd actually be a legalized drug dealer. And it wasn't until the final year I moved into a master's where I was studying kind of the background of these conditions. So I was on a cognitive neuroscience master's, that somebody very close to me was diagnosed with a condition. So the condition is major depressive disorder. However, because of the differences in clinical diagnoses and the lack of research, this condition can actually be diagnosed as schizoaffective. So depending on if an individual is sleeping. So I guess I'll zoom out a little bit and explain that major depressive disorder is usually a condition where individuals are severely kind of affected from a specific condition. It lasts for more than 6 months. Particularly in this scenario, this individual would remain in bed pretty much all day, not engage with anyone. And sometimes if they didn't sleep, they would have hallucinations. So certain doctors would diagnose this particular individual with schizoaffective if they hadn't slept that day and stated that they had heard things and seen things, whereas other doctors would diagnose it with mental health, with the diagnosis of major depressive disorder. So I then assumed this carer role from sort of after I finished my first master's and actually moved on to my second master's. I was actually caring for this particular individual. And then I actually had to move to America for my PhD. So having been a carer for about 3 years full-time on top of my PhD, on top of working part-time, on top of various other things, it was particularly difficult, but there is no sort of framework to state that, even being within the field of mental health, stating that you are feeling a certain way is just not it's not really accepted. So I don't necessarily tell my PI or tell my course directors about this. So this particular individual has relapsed on several occasions whilst I've been in America. One was on the first day of my first exam. So obviously that took a big toll on me, but there's no sort of actual communication. There's no actual communication streams. There's no sort of gold standard into how an individual who's experiencing personal issues, maybe not even directly themselves, can actually deal with this. There's no concessions. So I myself had to find coping mechanisms on top of already being removed from it, which is mentally pretty draining, because there's all these concepts that you start thinking about. You feel guilty because you've moved away and you're a carer, so passing that caring responsibility on. So that's a personal struggle. I think from a proximal sort of standpoint, I have various friends who are women scientists that are minorities, and there's been various comments. So some of my friends who are, for instance, they identify as African American, are on a PhD, have been asked, are they here because they got a sports scholarship, which would make no sense at the PhD doctoral level. So comments like that consistently try and remind, not only just being a woman, but then being told that you're different and why are you here? So it actually makes you question, is this indeed something, like, should I actually be here, which is not okay. Another friend who would identify as, I guess in England it would be West Indies and African, but here it would just be, I guess, Black in America. And she was asked by somebody, was she electrocuted because her hair appears in that way? So these comments are not okay. And I think that having these comments being said to you, like, shouldn't be the norm. Going back to other sort of proximal issues, my friend had a child during the second year of her PhD and was experiencing a lot of postpartum depression. And I don't know much, but I don't know if there's any support network there for her, because she came to a conference and brought her child with her, and is trying to continue down this line. But I don't think there is much support in terms of when you get comments like this, which will impact you. But then there's also personal, again, this is proximal to her because she's had a child, but the caring responsibilities, she just lost a parental figure. So there's not really much in terms of seeing the human in STEM. I think that we're seen as individuals that are working on a research question, but then we're expected to deliver. And on, I think everyone would agree that research isn't really 9 to 5. It's actually much more than that. People go in on weekends. People's sleep schedules are affected because they wake up and have to go check on their cells, for instance. I'm not in a dry lab purposely because I wanted to ensure that I had a healthy work-life balance. But I feel like there is a lack of support. There is a lack of conversation, a lack of discussion around mental health just generally. And I guess other comments personally, being a woman, when I initially started, being from an interdisciplinary background, not necessarily having the engineering background, having a degree in chemistry and psychology and biomedical sciences, it didn't necessarily appear to my male colleagues that I would succeed or indeed do well in my classes. And I would get comments like, I expected you to fail, and I actually had a speech ready because it didn't appear like I was working. So a lot of these comments are pretty normalized. I have friends that have told me it's pretty annoying because they will state a comment, for instance, in a working setting, say in a group project, and individuals that identify as males in that group will repeat exactly what the female individual has said, but in a louder fashion or changing it slightly, and then there'll be a group consensus based on the fact that it came from an individual that identifies as a male in the group or is seen as a male. So I think that there are several layers to the aggressions that not only women scientists experience, but then the minorities experience. And I think that there should be a clear distinction that minority women experience it at a greater depth, only because there is that layer of being a woman, but then being a minority. And that's not just your skin color, but it can also be a cultural thing. So I was with a friend over the weekend who would experience from her PI in a European country that he basically pushed her to state that she should be speaking in the native language, despite everyone speaking English, and it was pretty normal. And that in itself is an aggression. So it's not necessarily, I mean, she would appear as a white woman, but she is a minority in that country. And for her, she ended up leaving that country as a result of this pressure for her to speak a language just by one individual. And to give you an example, if she was doing a brain scan, everyone speaks English, so she explained the rules in English, and then the PI would come in and say everything in another language, and then she would have no idea what's been said. So there was no communication. It was pretty direct. That in itself is a microaggression. So I think that there are layers in this conversation, and I think that it's important to understand like what a minority is in different settings. But for the general context, I feel that being a woman in itself and then a minority is just another layer on top of that. Mental health conditions combined with various other issues obviously exacerbate it. So yeah, that's a bit of the things that I've seen from a personal level, but then also proximally from friends.
Thank you for your openness to share these matters with us. And I think that you've touched on some very important aspects, especially the fact that this sort of false sense of objectivity in STEM, which pervades everything and essentially removes our human nature, and the fact that there are so many layers to these problems, which requires an in-depth evaluation and a better solution in the days to come. Moving on to the final question I have for you today. Do you have any advice for prioritizing and ameliorating mental health for women doctoral researchers and minorities in STEM?
Yeah, so I guess from my research, when I look at life events from my research directly, I can see that having a pet or going outside and just exercising or even walking around for 15 to 20 minutes a day can really impact your mental health in a positive way and actually reduce depression, or not reduce, but is correlated with a reduction in depressive symptoms. And even things such as having a social support network is also seen in the same manner. So I think it's important to find a network of individuals. Again, those individuals can be whoever you feel like you can be your authentic self with, which can be pretty difficult because there aren't that many women within the field, especially for instance in engineering. As technically a British Indian woman within engineering in the Midwest, it's very rare I'm going to find anyone who would identify in the exact same manner as I do. But that's not to say that there aren't women out there. So I would say that you should consistently look for different support networks. That doesn't necessarily mean going out there with just that intention. It'd be good to talk to someone. And I always say it's good to talk to someone either in a professional capacity as a therapist. So certain institutes will give you 10 to 15 free therapy sessions, and that in itself is useful. If you don't feel like you want to communicate with someone on that level, journaling is always a great option. But being able to actually vocalize and work through everything that's occurred, I think is important, to actually reflect on the experiences that you're having and processing them, and understanding that maybe you aren't in the wrong, or maybe something else could have been handled a different way, or you should have spoken up here. I think it's really important to reflect, and speaking to somebody else who has the same mindset as you, who can essentially just tell you, yes, that wasn't correct, that wasn't appropriate, that's not okay, I think is important. So building a support network, whatever that may be for an individual, I think is important. I think that something else that I personally struggle with would be when I'm stressed, I'm an eater, so I will eat. And that's one of the ways in which you can actually see depression come out. So being aware of how you change in an environment is extremely important. So reflecting on that. So for me, I know that my mental health is dropping when I start eating a lot, and I may not even realize I'm eating a lot. So I'd have to, have checks in place to ensure that I'm making sure that I'm not dropping off, because I'm so busy, I'm not really thinking about food per se. And then this unconscious sort of eating that will occur as a result of a mechanism to cope is something that has unconsciously occurred already for me. So I would highly encourage women to kind of reflect on what they feel is their kind of coping mechanism and how they can make it more healthier for themselves. Something else that is also important is, even if you don't like exercising, just getting out there. And we can see that during the COVID pandemic, a lot of the mental health concerns were exacerbated because a lot of individuals were sitting at home consistently. And it's really important to get out there, get vitamin D. Again, there's seasonal depression. If you're not out there in the sun, that's again related to a condition. So ensuring that you're getting out there, and even if that means going for a walk around the block or going to the local park, I think it's really important to get out there and keep yourself active and healthy. In terms of more sort of micro level issues, in terms of the comments that I've experienced, or indeed the comments that my friends have experienced, I think it's really important to have a good sense of yourself. So for instance, even though I got these comments, it didn't necessarily knock me. Actually, it was one of the reasons I contacted 500 Women Scientists. And I said, I don't want any other women to be in this situation. And I'm quite outspoken, and I know who I am. I know what I am. I've thought a lot about it, and I want to help other women out there. And that's how I got involved with the organization. But I think it's really important to essentially don't doubt yourself. I think that's something that we always see. These comments are meant essentially said to make yourself doubt yourself while you're in the room, make yourself feel that you're not necessarily important, your voice is not necessarily important. And I think that more women should stick up for each other, minorities, or indeed the likes. I think it's important that if we see something out there that's occurring that's not correct, to call it out, so that people know that this is not okay. Otherwise, if we stay silent, these things perpetuate, and the status quo is the status quo, and no one's challenged it or questioned it or highlighted it. So yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. I think your perspectives were highly crucial and your answers were very insightful. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.